My family erased me, but I used the truth to take back my home and show them what happens when you cross me. Emily Harper is my name. I'm 30 years old, and up until the day my father called, I believed that purchasing my first home would be the point at which my life would no longer feel borrowed. After 10 years of working extra, missing vacations, and turning down nearly everything that wasn't survival, I had just closed on a little brick row house in Philadelphia. I hadn't even moved in completely yet. I still had half of my boxes taped shut. I was sleeping on an air mattress because I wanted to save money before purchasing actual furniture, and my dishes were piled on the floor. My phone rang that morning when I was measuring a wall for bookshelves in the kitchen. My dad didn't greet me. I initially laughed at his statement since it sounded so ridiculous. You need to come get your things. Your sister needs the house more than you do. Then my mother turned on speaker and said, calm as rain. This is your sister's home now, Emily. Be mature about it. I heard kids running and cupboard doors opening in the background, and then I heard my sister's voice light and smug and totally at home in a place she had never paid for. My stomach fell so much that I had to clutch the counter when she said, "You're not welcome here, so don't make this ugly." They didn't inquire. They were already residing there. My entire future had been given away like a family favor when my father used the emergency key I had given him while I was at work. They hosted a housewarming celebration in my place 2 days later and claimed that I had never assisted anyone. They believed they had deleted me. Whose name was on the deed was something they overlooked and didn't care to verify. Please let me know what time it is for you and where you are watching before I tell you what he said and what transpired after I left. I'm interested to see how far this tale may go. I didn't cry for 4 days in a row. That may sound weird, but I was too shocked to cry. My mind continued repeating that statement while I went to work at the museum, verified inventory on maps from the 17th century, signed transfer documents for a loan package from New York, responded to emails, and grinned at benefactors. This is the house of your sister. These days, paperwork, chain of custody, and verification are the main responsibilities of a museum registrar. I keep track of who owns what, where it comes from, where it goes, and what happens when someone touches something they shouldn't. I handled valuable items with greater legal protection than my own relatives believed I was entitled to. I passed the residence on the 5th night after dusk. I had my porch light on. My porch light, not the one from my previous apartment. I noticed a wreath on the door I hadn't purchased, small sneakers arranged by the doorway, and a stroller at the front step. I instantly knew the laugh that drifted through the screen window. No matter whose back she stepped on, Madeline, my golden sister, always landed lightly. That same evening, I discovered a hard disk containing digital family videos that I had been intending to arrange when I opened a storage container in my flat. I wasn't searching for grief from childhood. I wanted evidence that I wasn't insane. I selected one file, then another, and so on. When I was 8 years old, my mother was adjusting Madeline's pageant sash and instructing the camera to focus on the attractive one as I held a spelling bee trophy. When I was 14, my father was filming Madeline opening a second-hand automobile they had given up everything to purchase as I was in the background of a Christmas video wrapping gifts. At my college graduation luncheon when I was 22, my mother raised her glass and managed to transform the toast into a speech about Madeline's self-discovery. There was more than one dramatic betrayal. I became the family workhorse, and she became the family narrative after 100 minor adjustments. At last, I read their names out to the empty room as if I were reading a charge sheet. Madeline, Rebecca, and David Miller, and something inside of me cooled off once I spoke them that way. My perspective shifted from that of a daughter, to that of a records manager. I opened my closing settlement statement. Emily Harper is the sole proprietor. I looked over the mortgage. Emily Harper is the only borrower. I own the title, utilities, home insurance, and tax registration. I then looked at the doorbell camera app that I had installed but hardly utilized. The video remained intact. My father unlocks the door. My mom is bringing in clothing bags. Madeline is carrying a latte and instructing movers. Lucas, her spouse, is bringing in framed pictures. One of my crates was thrown like trash on the sidewalk. They had not just gone too far. They had provided me with high-definition documentation of their own trespass. Social media was where the next blow was delivered. My mother used heart emojis to comment on a happy family photo that Madeline had shared in my living room, writing, "Finally in our forever home, grateful for the people who actually show up." Numerous strangers praised them, and my father wrote, "Proud of you, kiddo." I stared at that screen for so long that my eyes began to water. One woman wrote, "So happy your family helped you get back on your feet." Another wrote, "Love seeing good people rewarded." I knew the tactic, not because it hurt. They weren't merely stealing my home. Before I could say anything, they were writing me out in public. Then the invitation showed up. Naturally, not to me. Madeline's open house post was shared by one of my mother's co-workers, and there it was. "This Saturday, join us in celebrating our fresh start." Our fresh start at my home. The fog lifted at that same time. The following morning, I called Adam Parker, a property lawyer, And before I could finish explaining, he told me not to alert them just yet. I collected all of the documents, saved all of the posts, downloaded all of the videos, and allowed them to continue speaking. I created folders, screenshots, copies of the deed, insurance paperwork, utility confirmations, ring footage, text messages, and even a picture of the lockbox combination that I had previously trusted my father with. Once more, they believed me to be the unseen daughter. However, when those who underestimate you are too conceited to conceal the truth, invisibility may be helpful. I had a legal file that was so thick it hurt my hands by the end of that week. By the end of the next, I was prepared to enter my own home and give them one last opportunity to tell lies. The housewarming celebration took place at 5:15 on a Saturday. When individuals are preoccupied with admiring themselves, time is crucial, so I arrived at 5:30. The block was lined with cars on both sides. I recognized my mother's church, two of my father's golfing friends, unfamiliar neighbors, and at least a dozen people carrying paper plates and red plastic cups in a house I had yet to move into. Madeline had only been there for less than 2 weeks and had already painted over the hallway trim I had spent a month fixing, so it was audacious of her to tell someone through the open front window that the property required a woman's touch. For about 10 seconds, I just stood on the pavement and breathed. Not because I was afraid, but more because improperly controlled anger leads to sloppiness. I hadn't come to be messy, either. I had come to make a lasting impression. I was first struck by the fragrance inside. Madeline usually used phony vanilla candles, grilled steak, and a potent floral room spray to make things feel pricey. My mom almost dropped her drink when she saw me first. My dad tensed up. With one hand still on the granite edge of my kitchen island, Madeline slowly turned and grinned as if I were the annoyance she had anticipated. She said, well, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. After all, the conversation faltered and faded. Look who decided to stop by. Without looking, I could sense that others were listening. Madeline persisted. You know, it's funny. She never lifted a finger while we were struggling, but now suddenly she wants attention. A few frightened giggles. My father went the more direct route, saying, Emily, this really isn't the time. I said, without raising my voice, don't start something in front of guests. I didn't have to. I dug into my bag, and placed 3 items on the dining table in front of everyone. Actually, I remarked, this is exactly the right time. A printed still photo from my doorbell camera showing my father coming in with the emergency key, a copy of the deed, and a note from Adam's office addressed to each of the 4 residents. I can only characterize the silence that descended upon the room as surgical. Madeline laughed too quickly after staring at the documents. This is ridiculous, she remarked. My father yelled, Dad said you were fine with us staying here. We're family. She had not yet used it. At that point, I turned to face all of the visitors and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. Since everyone is here celebrating, let me save you from being used as witnesses to a lie. I am the sole legal owner of this property. No one in this house has a lease, permission, or any ownership interest. They moved in while I was at work, using a key I provided for emergencies. My mom attempted to seize the documents. I pushed them out of the path. Madeline's grin broke. She growled, You are seriously doing this right now? In front of everybody. I gave her a direct look. You already did it in front of everybody online in my house. Then, after I sent him a single text, Adam, who had promised to stay close case I needed a witness, entered through the front door. He now gave a brief introduction, handed over the formal demand for the property's immediate surrender, and explained in a tone befitting a man who had often reminded entitled people of the law that any additional occupancy, property damage, or interference with entry would increase their liability. One of my father's buddies gently placed down his plate and left, then one more, and still another. You could almost hear the party breaking down. Naturally, Madeline attended the performance. This is cruel, she murmured, her tears coming on time. Her husband Lucas, who had been largely silent up until that point, asked the question that turned the entire room upside down. You know, we needed help. Madeline froze. Wait, you told me your parents co-own this place? My dad began to speak over him. My mom started crying. Lucas glanced at the deed, then at me, then back at his wife, as if he had just realized that his marriage had been predicated on false information. He questioned, Did you lie to me? Madeline lost her temper. I did what I had to do for our kids. That line might have worked on my parents. It did not work on me. No, I replied. I would want to tell you that's when they gave up. You did what was easiest because everyone in this family trained you to believe my work, my money, and my future were community property. It wasn't. Shame is rarely enough for people like that. They pivot to blame. I was termed selfish by my father. I was degrading them, according to my mother. Madeline informed the other guests that although I had always detested her, the enchantment had vanished. Everyone hears the hiss when a family story begins to bleed air because the falsehood has been punctured. For the sake of family harmony, my parents thought I would give in. They didn't realize that I had dedicated my adult life to learning how to keep records intact so that the truth might triumph over ego. I reviewed all of the accounts associated with the house, including utility spikes, unapproved mailing address changes, delivery receipts, messages from neighbors, an invoice from a contractor for an illegal wall removal that Madeline had boasted about on Instagram, and a tax notice related to a small online store that she had registered using my address without authorization. Adam Parker truly grinned at that one. He tapped the page and remarked, "This is where selfish becomes stupid." At that point, Charlotte Fisher, my closest friend, was the only one who could get me to eat a complete dinner. Charlotte worked as an exhibition designer at the museum. She was intelligent, witty, and unable to act as though a difficult circumstance was all right. She had known me long enough to realize that I'm generally working on something while I'm quiet. She was correct when she added, "You know what makes this worse? It isn't just that they took the house. It's that they were sure you would absorb it." We were sitting cross-legged on the floor of my flat one evening, surrounded by bankers' boxes and legal tabs. The event took place in the house. The true injury was the presumption that led to it. It had always been my responsibility to create, save, arrange, extend forgiveness, and then vanish so Madeline might shine in the middle of the picture. I therefore took a decision that had nothing to do with retaliation. I stopped waiting for my future to be defined by the museum. I had been discreetly honing my skills in provenance research, restoration, logistics, and collection planning for years. Charlotte encouraged me to use that expertise to private consultancy for historical societies and small galleries that had the resources to hire full-time registrars. "You already know how to prove what belongs to who," she said. I had 2 side clients in 5 weeks, followed by 3. Apparently, that's your superpower. Even though I was putting in more hours than ever before, I was feeling fatigued for the first time. I was put back together by every contract I signed, every invoice I sent, and every client who presented me as the person who can turn a project around. At my place, pandemonium was blossoming beautifully in the meantime, because regardless of who was abusing it, it was still my house. The demand letter was disregarded by my father. Madeline shared passive-aggressive statements about poisonous family members and treachery. My mother called twice, left teary voicemails, and nevertheless never apologized. But Lucas was no longer the same. He requested copies of the public records by calling Adam Parker's office. I learned everything from that. He was making sure he hadn't been tricked, and he had. After seeing a dumpster outside, a neighbor emailed me. In an effort to make the space feel more like her own, Madeline had begun making updates. Brick was painted, shelving was removed, and a new backsplash was installed. In one picture, the original built-ins from the study, which were a major factor in my initial decision to purchase the house, were being removed by workers. My hands trembled with rage. I then took a different action. I added a new category to the complaint, gave estimates, and documented the harm. When destruction is itemized, it is simpler to penalize. Once we filed for unlawful occupancy, property damage, improper business use of the address, and payment for carrying costs, the legal process proceeded more quickly. Additionally, Adam submitted a preservation notice cautioning them against erasing any bank records, communications, or social media posts pertaining to the property. My father was sufficiently alarmed by that to give me a call. There was no longer any authority in his voice. "This has gone too far," he declared. "You're making strangers think we're criminals." I recall responding with absolutely no heat at all. "No, Dad. Your behavior is doing that. I'm just making it visible." He ended the call. Madeline made the error that changed a compelling case into a disastrous one 2 days later. She used an online marketplace to sell my original foyer mirror, an item I got from my grandmother. Bless him, the buyer was a local history teacher who emailed to inquire about my downsizing after recognizing me from the museum website. When I saw the picture, I almost dropped my phone. Adam answered right away. Emergency motion, amended lawsuit, and conversion claim. It's not as dramatic as people think if you've never seen a family tale fall apart under documentation. It doesn't occur in a single blast. It takes place in layers. They lose consistency after first losing confidence. Then, they start contradicting each other. One narrative was given by my mother, and another by my father. A third is Madeline. Her posts no longer included Lucas in the background. By the time October arrived, church friends had ceased making comments, and I had developed something more resilient than rage. I was in a position of power. Being the daughter who everyone ignores teaches you how to get by without praise, which is funny. The risky part is that people frequently discover too late that you were the structural support for their delusions when you finally quit pleading to be seen. By November, the museum asked me to curate a brief public program on restoration ethics and the unseen work that goes into conserving history because my consultancy business had developed to such an extent. Charlotte assisted me in making it more ambitious, an elegant evening event with donors, local media, and a display of recovered items accompanied by narratives about misattribution, ownership, and care. I didn't care that the motif wasn't subtle. I wanted a space based on reality for once. The event was named What Survives. The display was not as appropriate as the title. It suited me. I felt more composed than I had in months as I stood under gallery lights on the night of the opening, wearing a navy dress and pinning my hair back. By 7 p.m., the room was full. There were reporters from 2 local arts publications. Board members, independent curators, and a number of new consultants were also present. People posed intelligent queries. They paid attention, they made notes. They claimed that because of my efforts, they now have a greater regard for the unseen mechanisms that safeguard important things. After being treated like support staff in my own family for my whole life, I wish I could describe what that was like. Then Charlotte, who had been controlling the flow close to the entrance, became still. I followed her eyes and saw Lucas, Madeline, and Rebecca, the last people I wanted in that room. Lucas appeared worn out. Rebecca appeared anxious. Madeline seems to have dressed for combat. She moved across the gallery floor with the same shiny, brittle assurance that she used when she was prepared to act recklessly. "Wow!" she exclaimed, surveying her surroundings as though approving. A few people pretended not to hear, saying, "This is cute." I didn't realize family drama could turn into a brand. Others did indeed hear. I sensed a change in the atmosphere as I waited. Charlotte drew nearer, but I shook my head slightly. Let her talk, I thought. When a liar feels theatrical, they are most effective. Madeline stepped forward and spoke louder. "You know, it's funny she acts so principled now. Half her inspiration came from living in our house and watching me rebuild a home for my children. It was there. Not enough that she had destroyed my property, lied, and trespassed. She also had to populate the story." I grinned with recognition rather than warmth. "Our house," I murmured into the microphone I had been using to make comments. Everyone in the room stopped talking. I nodded to Charlotte, who gave me a folder, and said, "That's interesting phrasing, Madeline. This time, there won't be a theatrical slideshow." I didn't require spectacles. I required accuracy. "Since you chose a public setting," I went on, "let's be exact. The property is legally mine. You were served notice. You used my address for your business without consent." There was a noticeable stir in the room when someone said, "You sold an inherited item that did not belong to you. And last week, your attorney requested a settlement discussion after seeing the amended damages." Lucas shut his eyes. Madeline attempted to be angry, but Rebecca begged, "Please. You are obsessed with humiliating me," she yelled. "You've always been jealous." Because it was the family default, the statement may have formally been accepted. She concluded by saying, "But timing is everything." A reporter really put down her pen and gazed, saying, "You never cared about that house until I made it look like something." I responded coolly while Charlotte shot me the tiniest glance that said, "She did not just say that out loud. I restored that house before you ever stepped inside it. I saved for it. I bought it. I insured it. I paid every tax bill on it. You decorated over my work and called it destiny." Then Lucas began to speak to the space. His voice was humiliated and flat. "She told me her parents owned it jointly, and Emily had agreed. That was all untrue. That was the sound of a lie dying in public, if you've ever heard it." Madeline started crying once more, but no one came to console her. Rebecca made a grab at her. Madeline pulled away. Lucas stepped back totally. Nothing physical occurred, but a museum trustee discreetly asked security to stand close by. Everyone was aware that the true harm was societal. The golden daughter with the pained smile was no longer the owner of the story. It belonged to the records, the eyewitnesses, the inconsistencies, and the man she had tricked into bringing his kids into court. She was the first to run. Rebecca trailed behind. Lucas stayed long enough to say, "I'm sorry," very quietly, before leaving through a different door. Perhaps the most satisfying thing was that the event continued after that. The fact that their pandemonium no longer controlled the entire space, rather than the exposure itself. People inquired about my well-being. I replied, yes, because for the first time, it was true. Near closure, I was contacted by a contributor from a preservation foundation who said, "You have a rare gift for making facts impossible to ignore." She offered to put me in touch with 2 organizations that were in need of outside experts. Charlotte laughed so much on the way home that she had to stop. She wiped her eyes and continued, "She tried to hijack a professional event, but instead she gave your career a testimonial." But there was something cleaner and more difficult underneath the humor. Intimacy had always been Madeline's way of keeping me silent. She had nothing left but performance after the truth entered the public sphere, where records were more important than roles. Furthermore, performance that lacks credibility is only noise in pricey shoes. Adam gave me the update I had been waiting for over the phone 4 weeks after the display. In addition to granting possession, the court established a deadline for enforcement in the event that the property was not willingly vacated. Additionally, they mandated that the surviving property's contents be preserved, which meant that there would be no more covert transactions, lost heirlooms, or false claims of damage. Settlement was what Madeline's side desired. My dad wanted to have a family discussion. Prayer was what my mother desired. I wanted distance, reimbursement, repairs, and keys. I found out later that Lucas had temporarily moved in with the kids while he considered his options. He was tired of believing Madeline's account of what had happened. It turned out that only when everyone else provided the electricity did the golden child shine the brightest. Then Madeline sent an SMS. I looked at it for a long time because I was intrigued by its daring more than because I was tempted. Can we please just meet? No lawyers, no drama, just family. After trespassing, misusing a fraud-adjacent address, destroying property, defaming someone online, and selling my grandmother's mirror, there were no attorneys. Because the wound felt personal, it was like asking a physician to put the scalpel away midway through a treatment that could save your life. I didn't respond. My dad called an hour later. Your mother is falling apart, he remarked. This has to stop. I responded, it stops when you stop treating my life like an extension of Madeline's wants. He let out a deep breath. Then, dread appeared in his voice for the first time. I nearly burst out laughing. You don't understand how bad this is getting. I understand perfectly, I replied. That's why it's finally working. Nevertheless, I consented to one meeting, but only on my terms, not at their house, church, or restaurant where they could act normally. I informed Adam that I needed all pertinent files prepared, damage estimates arranged, and reimbursement categories made clear. Then I invited them to my small apartment, which I had discreetly transformed into command center and which they had previously looked down upon. With almost comical accuracy, Charlotte assisted me in setting the scene. A copy of the possession order, printed stills in labeled folders, contractor estimates, legal binders on the dining table, and a spreadsheet with carrying costs, storage, repairs, and replacement values, snorts. Adam did indeed wait in the bedroom until I texted him to come out. All of this had taught me something vital. When used to deter persistent stealing, surprise is not cruel. Containment is surprise. It was a gloomy Sunday afternoon when they came. David first, looking 10 years older. Behind him, Rebecca was holding Kleenex. Last but not least, Madeline was wearing sunglasses inside, which told me everything about how she was feeling. I nearly didn't recognize her after she removed them. Not because she looked awful, but more because she was unremarkable, devoid of the family charm and the presumption that the impact would be absorbed by someone else. She was just a woman who had hit an immovable wall after making too many self-serving choices. Nobody gave me a hug. Excellent. We took a seat. The space seemed more cramped than before. I waited until it was uncomfortable enough for me to speak. My father began using the standard vocabulary: family tension, feelings, and misunderstandings. No one intended to hurt anyone. I listened to him until he remarked, "We all made mistakes." At that point, I pushed a binder in his direction and said, "No, you made choices." I then went through each person. Unauthorized entry, unauthorized occupancy, damage from unapproved renovations, using my address for business registration, selling my property, public false statements, legal fees, moving delays, higher insurance risk, storage expenses, contractor estimates, and replacement values. Every page included a sentence they had never considered writing. Halfway through, Rebecca began to cry. Madeline spoke up twice. Both times to suggest I was exaggerating, and both times I handed over another document. When individuals understand that emotion cannot erase paper, a particular type of quiet descends. It's practically sacred. I then summoned Adam. In fact, my mom gasped. Adam sat down, opened his own folder, and described the alternatives in simple English as Madeline mumbled, "Unbelievable. Vacate by the deadline, turn over keys, permit inspection, pay agreed upon damages over time, cooperate, or risk enforcement, increased civil exposure, and, depending on what is found, a referral of certain behavior for additional review." The term, discovery, made my father pale. Excellent. Family myths are put to death under oath during discovery. Madeline made one final attempt at manipulation. "You would really do this to your own sister?" she asked, gazing at me with tears in her eyes. For a moment, the child in me, the one conditioned to feel bad about being alive, stirred. The pivotal moment came when the adult said, "No, Madeline. I'm doing this because you did this to your own sister and expected no consequences. Not because they apologized. They didn't. Not at all. They fell apart." Rebecca acknowledged that she had informed family members that the house was essentially Madeline's now, as she believed I would never contest it. David said that he had utilized the emergency key because a decision needed to be made. Madeline said that because my neighborhood appeared more stable online and her lease issues were harming sales, she had altered the business mailing address. They grew smaller with each confession. Every answer made me calmer. Nobody was acting as though we were there to heal by the time they departed. We were there to close a trap. They signed nothing that day, but they had seen the complete terrain. And when people finally comprehend the immensity of the precipice they are standing near, some of them move back, some jump regardless. Madeline, as it turned out, still had one terrible option left in her. The final collapse happened faster than even Adam imagined. 2 days following the meeting, Lucas filed for separation. I know some viewers love revenge stories where the husband quickly becomes a hero. But it wasn't this. He was not my ally. He was a father who learned he had relocated his children into a legal mess because his wife and in-laws had lied, and he chose self-preservation. Still, the effect on Madeline was terrible. Without Lucas's income, and with her firm already wobbling from tax concerns connected to the address misuse, she could no longer pretend this was merely a sibling feud. It was a measurable life failure. My father called 3 times in one day, and when I eventually answered, he sounded nothing like the guy who had once told me to collect my belongings. Please, he continued, your mother and I can't cover this. That was when I learnt the part they had withheld even from me. In the effort to prop up Madeline's image, they had emptied most of their savings, helping with her debts and school fees for the kids, hoping my house would give her time to recuperate. They had risked with everything because they assumed I was the safe child, the one who would silently survive being sacrificed. The sheriff's enforcement date was set for 30 days after the possession order. They were out in 22. Not out gracefully, of course. Madeline left half-packed items in every room, cheap fixtures where finer ones had been removed, nail holes, broken trim, missing hardware, a shattered tile near the back entry. But she left. The first time I walked back inside following the lock change, I stood in the foyer and just listened. No footsteps that weren't mine, no borrowed laughter, no falsehood seeking to creep into the walls. It smelled like dust, paint, and a very expensive lesson. Adam's inspector documented everything. We retrieved my grandmother's mirror from the buyer, who was gracious enough to return it after hearing the story. The built-ins in the study had to be reconstructed. The mantel had gouges from nails Madeline's decorator had pounded in. The total damages were bad enough that my parents ended up selling a modest lake house they'd spent years bragging about to cover part of the compensation. That detail, I'll admit, offered me a very unique type of serenity. As for the public backlash, it didn't come from my shouting online. It comes from quiet, facts, and the gradual spread of consequences. Church friends learnt pieces. Neighbors learnt more. Lucas's family learned the rest. Madeline's boutique lost credibility as customer service concerns highlighted how unstable things were behind the scenes. My mother stopped posting positive comments about family togetherness. My father stopped providing advice to anyone. And when one cousin called to say she hoped I wasn't being too hard on them, I reacted with the most liberated words of my life. She changed the topic right away, saying, "You are welcome to house them in your name." It's funny how quickly sympathy fades when a mortgage, liabilities, and maintenance bills are involved. David and Rebecca requested to get together once more a month later. I nearly declined. Then I saw that what I really needed was clarity, not reconciliation. We met in a coffee shop near the courthouse. Neutral ground. Before she sat down, my mother sobbed. My dad appeared completely destroyed. This time, there were no justifications, just the thin, shocked anguish of those who had finally realized the price of their partiality. "We thought you'd understand," my mom muttered. "That's the problem," I replied. My father attempted to express their affection for us both by saying, "You always thought I would understand being treated as less." He was halted by me. Neither of them could respond to the statement, "Love without respect is just control wearing softer clothes." They inquired whether we could rebuild. I was honest with them. They would never again have a key to my house, access to my finances, or automatic entry into my life, even if they learned and lived limits one day. If forgiveness were to occur, entitlement would not be restored. Madeline's loss of the house wasn't the deeper form of retaliation. It wasn't even that my parents had to sell property to cover the losses, her marriage broke down, or her reputation was ruined. This was the more profound retaliation. They had written a role for me, but I was no longer available. I wasn't Madeline's go-to extra. I was not the daughter whose skill could be extracted without recognition. I wasn't the place where people dump their emotional waste to keep the golden kid shining. Yes, I regained the house, but more significantly, I regained authorship. I set a large oak table in the dining room, reconstructed the study, fixed the woodwork, hung the mirror again, and invited individuals who had never once asked me to go away so they could be comfortable. When Charlotte viewed the completed space, she chuckled and remarked, "Now it actually looks like it belongs to a woman with standards." She was correct. What does all of this teach us, then? Family doesn't always come first. Many terrible behaviors have been shielded by that line. The true lesson is that family does not grant permission to trespass for the rest of one's life. Not on your house, your money, your identity, or your tranquility. Someone does not have the right to use your labor as their rescue strategy just because you are related to them. Furthermore, being strong does not imply that you were destined to quietly put up with injustice. Letting repercussions come as they come might sometimes be the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Justice can sometimes take the form of a court order, a locksmith, and a quiet that no one in your family can control. If you are the child who was told to be patient, empathetic, mature, giving, and low maintenance while someone else received unending excuses, listen to me clearly. It's not harsh to set boundaries. You are not being petty with your snorts records. It's not resentment when you refuse to be used. It is respect for oneself. Tell me in the comments what would have been your breaking point if you had ever been ignored so the favored could continue to win. The party they hosted in a house that was never theirs, the key, or the lie. I appreciate you listening. What jumps out to me most in this story is that the biggest betrayal was never only about the house, it had to do with years of being treated disrespectfully. Because Emily didn't use cruelty to win, her success feels fulfilling. She prevailed via bravery, integrity, and self-control. Because of this, the tale has greater impact than typical retaliation. It demonstrates that keeping your peace is not self-serving and that injustice should never be justified by family. What would cause you greater pain? The fact that they stole the house or pretended that your suffering didn't matter at all?